In 80 AD, the Roman Empire unveiled the largest arena ever built, the Colosseum. Capable of holding over 50,000 spectators, it became the center of Rome's most brutal spectacles. On its opening days, thousands gathered to witness a world built on blood and entertainment. Two trained gladiators step into the arena, skilled, disciplined, and highly valuable fighters. Contrary to popular belief, these were not always fights to the death. Gladiators were expensive to train, and their survival often depended on skill, performance, and the will of the crowd. Some were slaves. Others volunteered for fame, money, and a chance at freedom. But inside the arena, every fight carried the same risk. One mistake could be your last. This is the true story of gladiatorial combat. Beyond the myths, beyond the movies. The story of the gladiator doesn't begin in the Colosseum, but in the graveyard. Long before these contests were a form of public entertainment, they were a sacred and grim part of funeral rites. The tradition was likely borrowed from the Etruscans, a civilization that flourished in Italy before Rome's rise. For them, and later for the early Romans, these duels were a munus, a duty, or an offering to the spirits of the dead. It was a form of human sacrifice, where the spilling of blood was believed to appease the gods and honor an aristocrat's soul on its journey to the afterlife. The very first recorded gladiatorial contest in Rome took place in 264 BC. To honor their deceased father, Junius Brutus, his sons staged a fight between three pairs of slaves in the city's cattle market. It was a private, solemn affair, a world away from the grand spectacles to come. For decades, these funerary games remained relatively small, a duty performed by powerful families. The turning point came as Rome expanded. The Romans clashed with the Samnites, a fierce tribe from Campania. After defeating them, the Romans adopted their distinctive armor and fighting style, creating the first recognizable gladiator type. Captured soldiers were now forced to fight in the style of their own people, turning military conquest into a public display. By 105 BC, what was once a private religious rite became a state-sponsored public spectacle. Ambitious politicians, and later emperors, realized the immense power of the games. By staging increasingly lavish and expensive contests, they could win over the masses, distracting them from poverty and political unrest with the powerful combination of bread and circuses. What started as a tribute to the dead had transformed into a potent tool of political control, a central pillar of Roman social life that would endure for nearly 1,000 years. Who were the men, and sometimes women, who filled the arenas of the empire? The answer is a complex mix of Roman society's lowest rungs and, surprisingly, some of its higher ones. The vast majority of gladiators were slaves, prisoners of war, and condemned criminals. For a criminal, being sentenced ad ludos to the games was a chance to survive, however slim, far better than being sentenced ad bestias, to be torn apart by wild animals. These men were considered social outcasts, living under harsh conditions and segregated from society. Yet, not everyone in the arena was forced to be there. Some were free men, driven by crippling debt, who volunteered to risk their lives for a shot at fame and fortune. Even bankrupt aristocrats were known to take up the sword to restore their wealth. And until Emperor Septimius Severus banned them in 200 AD, women also fought as gladiators, though they were a rare and exotic sight. Regardless of their origin, every gladiator's life revolved around one place, the ludus, or gladiator school. These were part barracks, part prison, run by a manager called a lanista. Life inside was a rigid routine of eating, sleeping, and relentless training. Their diet was heavy in carbohydrates, like barley and beans, earning them the nickname hordearii, or barley men. This was by design. It helped build a layer of fat over their muscles, which could protect them from superficial cuts and make for a bloodier, more dramatic fight for the crowd. Training was the heart of a gladiator's existence. New recruits, or tyros, spent months in grueling preparation before their first fight. They didn't start with lethal weapons. Instead, they used a rudis, a wooden practice sword, and other training weapons that were deliberately made heavier than their real-life counterparts to build strength and stamina. They drilled for hours against a palace, a wooden stake, perfecting their strikes and footwork. Each gladiator specialized in a specific fighting style, and their training was overseen by a doctor, often a retired gladiator who was an expert in that class. But training wasn't just about killing. It was about performing. Gladiators were taught to fight with style, to showboat, and to make their movements exciting for the audience. They were, first and foremost, entertainers. Despite their low social status, these men were valuable assets. A lanista invested heavily in his fighters, so they received excellent medical care, regular massages, and access to baths, a level of hygiene far better than that of the average Roman. A strong bond, a brotherhood, often formed between gladiators who lived and trained together, even knowing that one day they might be forced to kill each other in the arena. The genius of Roman entertainment was its love of variety. This was never more obvious than in the diverse classes of gladiators. Organizers didn't just throw two men into an arena. They engineered matchups, pairing fighters with contrasting styles and equipment to create the most thrilling contests possible. These pairings were often a tactical chess match of strength versus speed, or heavy defense against a nimble attack. Gladiators can be roughly divided into two categories: the heavily armed and the lightly armed. First, the heavyweights. The most iconic was the Murmillo. He looked like a classic Roman legionary, with a short sword, gladius, and a massive rectangular shield, scutum. His most distinctive feature was a large helmet with a fish-shaped crest, which gave him his name. The Murmillo was a tank, a powerhouse built for defense and close-quarters combat. Often pitted against the Murmillo was the Thrax, or Thracian. Modeled after warriors from Thrace, he carried a small square shield and a distinctive curved sword, the Sicca, which was perfect for hooking around an opponent's shield to find a weak spot. Another heavily armored fighter was the Hoplomachus. Inspired by Greek hoplite soldiers, he wielded a spear for long-range attacks and a short sword for when the fight got close, protected by a small round shield. The Secutor, or Pursuer, was a specialist. His equipment was nearly identical to the Murmillo's, but his helmet was smooth and round with only tiny eye holes. This design had one purpose: to defend against the net of his primary opponent, the retiarius, leaving no edges for the net to snag. In stark contrast were the lightly armed gladiators, who relied on speed and agility. The most famous of these was the retiarius, or net fighter. He was the most exposed of all gladiators, wearing almost no armor except for a shoulder guard. His weapons were a weighted net, a long trident, and a dagger. His strategy was to entangle his heavily armored opponent and then move in for the kill. The classic matchup of a swift retiarius against a powerful secutor was the ultimate clash of styles. Beyond these main types, the Romans introduced an array of specialized fighters for novelty. The Demacharis was a whirlwind of steel, wielding two swords at once. The Esidarius fought from a war chariot, a style inspired by the Celtic tribes of Britain. There was even the strange Andabata, who fought blind, wearing a helmet with no eye holes and relying on hearing and luck. This incredible diversity ensured that no two fights were the same, giving the crowd a unique test of skill, strategy, and survival every time. In the early days, Gladiatorial games were held in temporary wooden arenas, but the ultimate stage was yet to come. After the disastrous reign of Emperor Nero, the new Flavian dynasty sought to win back the public. Their solution was monumental. On the site of Nero's private lake, they constructed the Flavian Amphitheater, a structure so iconic it would later be known simply as the Colosseum. Funded by spoils from the siege of Jerusalem, construction began under Emperor Vespasian. It was officially inaugurated by his son, Titus, in 80 AD, though the structure was fully completed by Titus's successor, Domitian, who added the elaborate underground network of tunnels and cages known as the Hypogeum. It was an engineering marvel, as tall as a 12-story building and holding up to 80,000 spectators. From the Hypogeum, animals and gladiators were lifted into the arena by complex elevators. The inaugural games held by Titus were the most extravagant the city had ever seen, lasting for 100 days. A day at the Colosseum was a carefully structured program. The morning was for the Venations, or wild beast hunts, featuring exotic animals from every corner of the empire. The midday period was the grimmest, reserved for public executions where criminals, often unarmed, were thrown to wild animals. Finally, in the afternoon, came the main event, the gladiatorial contests. To the sound of trumpets, the fighters would parade into the arena and salute the emperor. These duels were the climax of a day dedicated to demonstrating the power, wealth, and brutal authority of Rome. While most gladiators are anonymous figures lost to history, a few achieved a level of fame that rivaled modern sports superstars. Their names were chanted in the arenas and scribbled as graffiti on city walls. They were legends of the sand. No gladiator is more famous than Spartacus. A Thracian soldier sold into a gladiator school, Spartacus was more than a fighter. He was a revolutionary. In 73 BC, he led a revolt of around 70 fellow gladiators, and his army of escaped slaves swelled to tens of thousands. For 2 years, they terrorized the Roman Republic, defeating several legions sent against them. Spartacus's rebellion was ultimately crushed, and 6,000 of his followers were crucified along the Appian Way, a brutal message to any who would dare defy Rome. His legacy, however, has endured as a universal symbol of the fight for freedom. Then there were the rivals Priscus and Varus. Their legendary duel at the opening of the Colosseum in 80 AD is the only gladiator fight for which we have a detailed account, thanks to the poet Martial. After fighting for hours to a perfect stalemate, the crowd roared for them to be spared. Emperor Titus, moved by their incredible display, declared both men victors. In a truly unique event, he awarded both Priscus and Varus the rudis, the wooden sword of freedom, on the same day. Not every gladiator craved freedom. Flamma, a Syrian gladiator, was one of the most successful fighters of his era. His gravestone proudly records his incredible career. He fought 34 times, winning 21, drawing 9, and losing only 4. Remarkably, he was offered his freedom 4 times and refused it each time, choosing to continue his life in the arena. Other gladiators were famous for unique skills. Carpophorus was a bestiarius, a master beast fighter. At the Colosseum's opening games, he stunned the crowd by defeating a bear, a lion, and a leopard in succession, before also slaying a charging rhinoceros. Finally, some gladiators became famous for their connections to power. Spiculus caught the eye of the notorious Emperor Nero. His victories earned him Nero's favor, along with palaces and riches. These men were more than just fighters. They were cultural icons whose stories of bravery, rebellion, and glory have echoed through the centuries. Hollywood has given us a clear image of gladiatorial combat, a fight to the death, ending with an emperor giving the thumbs down. But the reality was far more complicated. Let's start with that thumbs down gesture. It's a modern invention, likely popularized by a 19th century painting called Pollis Verso. Roman writers mention a turned thumb, but what that actually looked like is up for debate. Some scholars suggest the death signal may have been a thumb pointed up, like an unsheathed sword, while the gesture for mercy was a closed fist with the thumb tucked inside, symbolizing a sheathed weapon. Contrary to popular belief, not every fight ended in death. In fact, for certain periods, death in the arena was surprisingly uncommon. The reason was simple economics. It took a lot of time and money to train a skilled fighter, and killing them off after one loss would have been a disastrous business model. Estimates based on evidence from places like Pompeii suggest the death rate for a loser could be as low as 1 in 5. A fight usually ended when one gladiator was wounded or exhausted and surrendered by raising a finger. The final decision of life or death, missio, rested with the sponsor of the games, often the emperor. He would typically gauge the mood of the crowd. If a gladiator had fought bravely, the crowd might call for him to be spared to fight another day. If he was deemed a coward, they might demand his death. When mercy was denied, death was swift. An attendant, sometimes dressed as Charoon, the Etruscan ferryman of the dead, would deliver the final blow. But for the victor, or the loser who was spared, life went on. Success brought tangible rewards, prize money, public adoration, and even sponsorship deals. The ultimate prize, however, was freedom. A gladiator who fought with distinction for several years could be granted the rudis, a small wooden sword. Holding the rudis meant he was no longer a slave to the arena. He was a free man. Many retired gladiators went on to become trainers, passing their deadly knowledge to the next generation. For centuries, the games were the beating heart of Roman entertainment, but no empire lasts forever. The decline of gladiatorial combat was a slow process, driven by profound shifts in Roman society, economics, and religion. A major factor was the crisis of the 3rd century, a period of civil war and economic collapse that made funding the incredibly expensive games more and more difficult. However, the most significant force was the rise of Christianity. As the new religion spread, its values stood in stark opposition to the pagan traditions of the arena. Christian writers condemned the games as morally corrupting murder. In 325 AD, Constantine, the first Christian emperor, issued an edict ordering that criminals be sent to the mines instead of the arena, so they could be punished without shedding their blood. Still, the tradition was hard to kill. The games lingered, especially in Rome itself. The story goes that the final blow came in 404 AD. A Christian monk named Telemachus traveled to Rome and, horrified by the spectacle, leaped into the arena to separate two fighting gladiators. The enraged crowd allegedly stoned him to death. In response to this martyrdom, Emperor Honorius issued a definitive ban on all gladiatorial contests. The tradition didn't vanish overnight, and a later emperor, Valentinian III, had to repeat the ban in 438, but the age of the gladiator was officially over. Though the arenas fell silent, the gladiator never truly disappeared. They live on in our collective imagination as a powerful symbol of ancient Rome, embodying its martial prowess, its love of spectacle, and its capacity for breathtaking cruelty. The world of the gladiator was a universe of brutal contradictions. They were slaves, yet also celebrities. They were socially despised, yet admired for their courage. They were pawns in a system of state-sponsored violence, yet capable of profound acts of heroism and sportsmanship. The history of gladiatorial combat is more than a story of blood and sand. It's a story about Roman society itself, its values, politics, and obsession with life and death spectacle. From their origins as a solemn funeral offering to their transformation into the greatest show on earth, gladiators held up a mirror to the Roman world. Their stories, carved into stone and written in blood, remain a powerful and unsettling part of our shared human history.